Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. I'm Alex Perala. I'm here with my esteemed and illustrious co-host, Tony Bitsionis. Hello, Tony.
Alex, hello.
Today we've got a really good episode. We got the chance to talk to Blair Cohen, the founder and president of Authentic ID. Um, Authentic ID, we've talked to them before. Chris Borkenhagen was on the show a short while ago. Really friendly guy who had a lot of
Canadian.
interesting things to say. Would you say Canadian?
Yes.
He was indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Still
Uh,
is.
and he still is, as far as we know. And he really talked to us about data privacy and security. But Blair, in this conversation, gets more into the I guess, tangible aspects of preventing fraud using biometrics and other tech. And on that note, Authentic ID is a founding partner of ID Tech. I mean, for listeners who maybe don't know, if you only know us from a podcast, ID Tech is our news media brand. It used to be called Find Biometrics. It was very, very focused on biometric technology. We rebranded in September and remain very, very focused on biometric technology, but we're having a bigger conversation about identity technology, just in line with how the industry itself is evolving. And when we talk to our friends in the industry about this new way of talking about it, we had a few who were really enthusiastic about the idea. Authentic ID was one of them. And yeah, and they gave us the support we needed to make sure we could rebrand smoothly. And Authentic ID is a great fit because they have this platform that definitely has some sophisticated biometric technology, which Blair gets into a bit, facial recognition and behavioral analytics. But they're also focused on like verifying IDs, and they're looking at all kinds of other. I mean, Blair couldn't even tell us some of the signals that they're looking for because it's
Hmm.
proprietary. But it's a much bigger picture, and it was great. It was a great kind of peek at behind the curtain at how one of these platforms works. And on top of that, he just had like he founded the company and he had a lot of really interesting perspective. He watched this industry evolve,
Hmm.
Tony, before you and I got into it. So he had some great insights there, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, he did. He had a lot of really interesting things to say, and one of the ones that stood out to me the most was just when we talked about organized crime and the kind of the role that organized crime
Yeah.
plays in the industry. It's something that I think we all kind of understand is there, but don't often consider or talk about. So that was a lot of fun. But I don't want to give away too much because it really is a great conversation. So without further ado, do we do this?
Let's do it. All right. I'll just say welcome and I'll ask you to introduce yourself. In fact, why don't I do that right now? Rather than just tell you what I'm about to do. So, Blair, welcome to the show. You're here not long, I think, after we spoke with a colleague of yours, Chris Borkenhagen. And so we're very happy to welcome you, the CEO of Authentic ID. Could you maybe just to start, like, what's your background with the company and maybe before that professionally?
Well, first of all, Tony and Alex, I've been following both of you guys for a long time. Really appreciate your podcast. Enjoy your perspectives and ingenuity. So, thank you for having me here today, and thank you for having Chris a couple weeks ago. We come at this from a little bit different perspective. Him being our CISO, and we house some very, very, very sensitive PII and information on most consumers in the U.S. and many, many, many in North America. So I'm going to come at this at a little different perspective, not so much to scare you to death from a storage of data standpoint, but to scare you to death maybe a little bit in terms of how vulnerable all of we are towards identity impersonation, account takeover attacks, and maybe some best practices for mitigating some of those vulnerabilities and risks. But so me, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I know I look young, but I'm not. This is my fifth company as an adult. The previous company prior to founding Authentic ID, and just to set the record straight, I am not the CEO of the company. I'm the founder. I'm
Wow.
the president. I'm the visionary guy. But
Are
the
you,
day-to-day business, we've got somebody that's more qualified than I to run it on a day-to-day business, Reed Tossick, who's also a serial entrepreneur and had a number of very large exits. So I come at this a little bit different. I've been basically doing identity for 30 something years. Started one of the world's first background screening companies where we do background checks on you and make sure that you're everything that you claim to be in terms of employment and criminal records, driving histories, credit histories, all of those kind of things. And started that company back in 1988. Part of doing a background check on people was also performing an identity verification. So, been performing identity verifications on US consumers anyway for the better part of 35 years. And in the past, we were very successful in doing this kind of the old fashioned way now, which is you would assert when you applied for a job your name, address, date of birth, social security number. I'd take the social and run it through one of the credit bureaus to see if the social you asserted that belonged to you actually was on public record as belonging to you. And that worked really darn well. There just wasn't a whole lot of people trying to lie about that back in 1988. There weren't really a whole lot of people lying about that even in 1998. But what I started to see in circa 2002 was we'd run this social and 12 names would come back associated with the social. Which one really owns it? And as that progressed, by 2006, I started to see as many as 50 different names come back that were associated with a single social security number. And I think it would have been more than 50 if the bureaus hadn't just capped how many names could come back associated with a specific social. So in 2006, I started to, it was pretty obvious that using data to prove that Alex is broken. Breaches were happening with, like we had never seen them before. And all of our personal information, our names, addresses, date of birth, social security numbers, they were no longer things that only you and I knew about ourselves. It were things that all the criminals and fraudsters and all the hackers knew about you too. So they started to exploit that. And it became pretty easy to just fill out an application and become you. As long as you knew the right name, address, date of birth, social security number, and maybe the answer to a few knowledge-based authentication questions. How much is your mortgage payment last month? What's your cat's name? What was your mother's maiden name? Things like that. But again, all data. And all of that type of data has been breached many, many, many times over. So I started to really ponder and ruminate the problem and figure out what a better way forward was. Clearly, it wasn't using data. We needed to come up with other factors to be able to prove that people were who they said they were. And what's always been considered the gold standard for proving identity everywhere is producing a government-issued ID. So I started thinking about that. Well, how can a person really look at an ID, because they get very sophisticated these days, and know whether it's real or not? And found some technology that had been in use by Customs and Border Protection agencies that would forensically examine a government issued ID. Limitations there. You had to have purpose-built document scanners that lit up the ID in 3 different light spectrums. It had to be physically tethered to a Windows PC. It wasn't that fast. And obviously, you couldn't do this remotely. Having all of that equipment is something that only Customs and Border Protection agencies and Homeland Security offices and things like that had. But I knew that there was something there. This examination of a government issued identity document makes all the sense in the world. A fake ID beats most security systems and processes that people have in place today. Um, and so I became president of one of those companies that was providing that technology to CBP and others only in the public sector, and started to think about how we could do this remotely. And around that time, we're now up to circa 2011. And that's when phones became super powerful. The cameras inside of these things became super powerful. The processing power inside of those things became super powerful. So I realized, my gosh, people could do this remotely. We don't need these purpose-built document scanners. But how do I know if somebody didn't pick Alex's pocket and stole your ID and they're offering that as proof of identity? I really need to know who's at the end of this transaction. And the way that we accomplished that was using facial recognition. So is the person at the end of the transaction the actual person depicted on that government issued identity document? We were the first company in the world to do this and do it in a fully automated way. So results took 6-7 seconds. So that's kind of my background. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but it's important context.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then I guess since then, the platform has just become like a lot bigger. Like the focus was, let's do, I guess you'd say, a selfie check. And now it's like a lot more comprehensive from what I can see.
Yeah, it's quite a bit more comprehensive. The technology that I referenced earlier, where we use scanners to perform checks and forensic examinations on identity documents, depending on the ID, they all have different amounts of security features, patterns, that kind of things you could actually validate. But we would run somewhere between 10 and 24 different tests on the ID. Today, just to give you some context, we run over 500 different tests on every government issued ID. We've taken the response times down from 6 seconds down to a 2-second response time, which is pretty remarkable when you think about what we do versus somebody like a credit bureau that's processing ones and zeros. Ours is computer vision. You're taking super high resolution photos of your government issued ID and your face, both front and back. So there's a whole lot of compute that's going on in a very, very quick time. So our engineers have done a remarkable job reducing latency, which now opens up online markets. In the past, we were deployed at a lot of banks and a lot of telcos. When you're physically walking in, a process takes 6 or 10 seconds. It's no problem. But if you're on an online transaction, you're trying to prove your identity to name a transaction that you're trying to do, 10 seconds starts to feel like an eternity. So getting that down to 2 seconds time, we're pretty proud of.
Yeah, I want to go back to one particular thing you were just talking about the ID scan, because we just rebranded from Find Biometrics to ID Tech, and part of the rationale is everybody understands biometrics are super important, but there's lots of other identity technology involved in kind of the big picture. And this is one of those things that we maybe have underexplored, is like when you say you do 500 kinds of checks on a digital ID, what does that mean? Like, what are you checking for? It's not just reading the name. Like I didn't know what's going on there.
No, I mean, it's quite a bit more than that. I wish I had this slide. We've got what we call the wall of forensics that actually show you probably 200 or 300 of the categories of algorithms that we run. So we look at a little bit of everything there, Alex. Visually, we look to see if the security features that we expect to see on the document, if they exist. If we get the right color response from them, if they're precisely placed on the document, we look at all these fine patterns that are in the back of the ID. And with the human eye, you can't really see what those patterns mean, say, are. But under intense magnification, using computer vision, AI, and ML, there is a real pattern to those patterns that we can validate. And again, same thing, color response, precise placement. It's something that the fraudsters get wrong an awful lot. Visual checks can only take you so far. I will admit there are plenty of generative AI websites out there. There are plenty of fake ID websites out there. And in general, they start with a perfect template. So they'll get somebody from Georgia to give them their real ID, take all the data off of it, and kind of templatize it. And from there, you simply type in the name that you want to appear, the photo that you want to appear, and boom, they produce this beautiful, visually looking ID, but they always make mistakes. So there's a lot of textual analysis and behavioral analysis that's performed at the same time. So the text, most people don't know that things like the driver's license number, there's an algorithm for that. It isn't a random set of numbers that somebody just said, okay, this is the next sequence in line. It's bits and bytes and pieces of your PII that are used to that form an algorithm to determine what that document driver's license number is. On the bottom, underneath your headshot, I don't know if you have it in Canada, but here in the US, we've got another long sequence of numbers called the DD, document discriminator number. And that indicates what county, what person within the county. It varies by state on what all that data means. But again, there's an algorithm for that. We've done all the code breaking, and this is pretty tough. Just in the US alone, there's over 750 in use government issued identity documents in wide circulation today. We do this globally, so we have to do this code breaking on 12,000 different documents across the world. And then lastly, I touched on behavioral. I won't go into deep detail there because we haven't gotten all of our patents approved just yet. But the concept is when you're going through the process of imaging your real ID, and imaging your real face, you act in a very specific manner and pattern. So we pick up all the sensor data from these devices, accelerometer, gyroscope, compass used, camera used. Give you just a little bit of a hint. So for example, when you're prompted to take a selfie of your face, if you're using the rear camera on that device, that's anomalous behavior, right? You're probably not taking a picture of your face. You're taking a picture of somebody else's face or my face that you found out on the internet or did a picture of or something along those lines. But going back to where we might be missing, I agree biometrics are critical, and I think they're the path forward. One step that's super important that I think many of the biometric companies are missing is, I mean, that's the keys to the kingdom, right? Once I've enrolled you, your biometrics, it's the keys to the kingdom. I'm now you. There are a lot of places where you can go and enroll your biometrics where you're simply handing somebody that's making $15 an hour your ID. They're looking at it and saying that's real. And then they enroll things like your two fingerprints and your iris. You guys probably all know the service I'm talking about when I reference that. But that exists a lot where this strong identity proofing, you've really got to make sure that Alex is Alex and Tony is Tony before we can enroll and use biometrics with any integrity.
Yeah. On that note, I saw Tony. I wonder if you heard about this. Tony and I are in Ontario. We have a thing called Service Ontario here instead of a DMV. That's how people get their driver's license. And I saw this news item that there was some sort of car theft, like an organized crime ring stealing cars, and they had employees working in Service Ontario. I don't know if they were actually like registering people, but they were manipulating their biographic data for car registrations. It was pretty wild.
That is not uncommon. We service many of the telcos, and you can go on a lot of the dark web websites, and they can tell you if you want to get. I won't name the brands because we service them all. I'm not going to throw any of them under the bus, but you can get an insider to collude with you and do a SIM swap for a relatively nominal amount of money. $1,000 will get it done in most of the major telcos. And if you think about the value and what that really unlocks on some people's cell phones, some people might have big crypto wallets or get into your banking app with that SIM swap. Lots of damage can be done.
Yeah, I'm sorry to like drag us into a little tangent, but you said that the driver's license number was algorithmically derived from bio.
Yes.
In theory, could someone reverse engineer it and figure out like the name of the person from the code? Is that what that means?
Yeah. It's no, you couldn't figure out the name of the person. You couldn't really decode anything like that. But you might be able to, with enough studying, in studying the driver's license number and looking at all the bits and bytes and their sequences on your DL, you might be able to figure out what that algorithm was and how to recreate that. But there's so much more. That DD number, I mean, a driver's license number is generally 9 alphanumeric. The DD is 28. Much more difficult. Another thing that happens a lot is the data on all of your government issued identity documents is also stored in the barcode on the back of that ID. And it's stored in a very, very, very specific manner and pattern. We see tons of errors there. They'll forget commas. They'll have things that are uppercase when they should be lowercase. Things like they don't know when the expiration date is. We'll see issue dates on IDs that precede when that series of ID was ever even issued. We'll see expiration dates on those documents that are 10 years from now when the state rule is 4. They're only valid for 4 years. So lots of other things. Yeah, you could probably figure out some of the ways that DMVs embed and code information in those documents, but figure out the whole thing, it's more complicated than most people realize.
Okay. So Tony, we're not gonna probably decode that stuff ourselves, but
Well, that's a quitter's attitude, Alex, but let's just say for now we have other things to work on. Blair, I wanted to ask you the other day off the camera or off mic, we were talking about, you mentioned some big forthcoming changes coming to AMVA. Can you just speak a little bit about those and how that's going to impact what Authentic ID does, or how that's going to influence what you do?
Yeah, I think it's the right move. And AMVA, it's not panacea. There's some validity to AMVA. We deal with a lot of banks, and banks are under a super large amount of pressure to treat everybody the same. AMVA does not disseminate data from every state. States like California, New York, 2 big states, there are many more, are exempt and don't provide data to AMVA at all. So for my bank customers, AMVA is almost a non-starter, because I can't say I do one thing for somebody in Georgia that I do differently in California in terms of vetting who you are. Where we've been deployed with banks and using AMVA in the past, something kind of unusual happened. What we found was when we're analyzing these identity documents that are being submitted by their customers, we're finding a lot of these things are fake. However, the data that was on these, when we bounced it up against AMVA, they were matching. So names that were supposed to be on file associated with that driver's license number were exactly what AMVA had on file. The challenge that we've got is not only the limited participation amongst the states, but the fact that they're only validating data again, the whole crux of why this problem started. So they'll only validate the attribute. If I send in a driver's license number that I say belongs to Alex, we'll either say yes or no, it belongs to Alex and that matches. They won't append, they won't add. But the challenge with that is there's never been a biometric check in the past. It's just validating data. And it is something that a lot of us have been asking AMVA to augment. And it looks like they're getting there, Tony. Great question. Thanks for asking. I don't know the full number of states. It sounds like as many as 6 states are willing to participate in disseminating and validating not only the biographic attributes, but the biometric attributes that they have on file directly at the issuer starting the beginning of next year. We'll see how our customers want us to embrace that, and if they want to at all. It's somewhat of an expensive service, I will say that. It's kind of pricey.
So, but then the way that would work would be, just to spell it out, would be that Authentic ID could then run through the biographic and the biometric match up against AMBA's records to verify. And you're not going to have a better credential issuer than that, most likely.
It's a system of record. You don't get a better issuer than that. As you mentioned with the ServiceNow thing, there could be some collusion going on with some of the DMVs. So just because the document is legitimately on file with the issuer doesn't mean for sure that there wasn't any fraud going on and they didn't produce fake birth certificates, social security numbers, things like that. But that's become increasingly more difficult to do these days with the Real ID Act, where we're actually validating those social security numbers. We're actually validating birth certificates directly where they were issued as well. So it's a pretty strong identity proofing that's happening there.
Can we just touch on Real ID a little bit? Because I see this coming up all the time lately, and I don't fully know what it is. I'm hoping you can give me like a quick rundown.
Oh, it has been a journey, Alex. This is something that I think has been going on, since not that long after 9/11, where we needed to push for better identity documents. Most people don't know that 18 of the 19 hijackers that boarded those planes all boarded with fake IDs.
Oh, okay. No, I didn't know
All
that.
boarded with fake IDs.
Wow.
President Bush had a heart attack. He's like, this can't happen again. We have got to have more ability to validate these documents, A, and B, we've got to make sure we've got to be more confident in who we're actually issuing these real documents to. So Real ID was the plan to be able to make sure that we're really issuing IDs to real people and not made up identities. It's been something that the states have had just the hardest time adopting. So this, as I mentioned, started back, maybe 2005, somewhere in there. And here we are today, 2024, and still not every state is Real ID compliant. But it makes it much more difficult. So you've got to bring a real utility bill from your address. So I know for sure that when they issued Blair an ID, that's his address. I bring them my real social security number, which they're able to validate directly with the Social Security admin, make sure I'm a real legal U.S. citizen and I'm a taxpayer. They're able to validate that I was born here directly with that birth certificate. So all these other things that they now require in order to get a document issued have absolutely strengthened up that whole process. We actually support the state of California now. They're still not fully Real ID compliant. They're still kind of in the pandemic mindset in that they don't necessarily want everybody to have to come to the DMV. So remotely, you're now able to image your ID using our technology, image your face using our technology. We're sending that to the state of California, performing a match there. So super helpful. And that's the one place where we do have biometric access today.
Well, that's reassuring. If you're gonna
Speaking of your technology, Blair, I wanted to ask you about a couple of solutions that we've read and written about, and just if you could just outline their differences or how they're complementary. Velocity Check and Fraud Shield, I've heard you describe them as proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
What's the difference, or how do they work?
Quite well is the short answer to that question, Tony. Quite well. What we've discovered, and not all of our customers take advantage of this, but you get to a point as a big enterprise where there are people that you want to do business with and do a lot of business with, and then there are others that have burned you in the past, and we're like, I'm writing that person off. I never want to do business with them again. They lied about this. They never paid their bills. It took me for 8 phones. They've got to go find another carrier. So some of the telcos are very adamant about this. They're like, I don't ever want to do business with you again. So what we're doing is taking the biographic data from the document and the biometric data from the document and throwing it into the repository. Keep in mind today, this only works in a silo. So we're only doing this for one customer at a time. None of this data is shared amongst all of our different customers. But once they determine that you're a bad person, we throw all of that information into Fraud Shield. This is the reactive one, because we don't know right off the bat whether you're a bad person unless you've given us a fake ID. A lot of people are using real IDs, but become bad and become a fraudster after the fact. So it may be 60, 90 days later. Once the company's determined they no longer want to do business with you again, every time that we scan an ID for somebody that does want to become a customer of this customer of ours, we're again scraping the biographics, scraping the biometric information, running it through Fraud Shield to see if we've seen them before. And what we found was that as many as 150, 160 different IDs that we intercepted in the first couple of weeks of this being deployed. Same face was the only continuous consistency in all the documents, but perfect PII, perfectly stolen data. All the data would have matched the credit bureaus, would have matched AMBA. So these guys are very, very crafty. So the Fraud Shield product stops them from ever doing business. We instantly know. And it looks pretty funny if the first time I saw you, your name was Blair, and the next time I see you, your name is Tony, and the next time I see you, your name is Alex. Pretty obvious fraud there. To give you just some idea, one of the telcos that we've had this deployed for last year alone, saved right at $70 million prevented. So these are repeat bad actors that continue. They're relentless. I think it was 72,000 repeat bad actors that we stopped in real time.
Oh, wow.
So highly, highly, highly effective. But what we're seeing now is some of our customers want to stop this faster. I don't want to find out 90 days down the road that you're not going to pay your bill. I want to be able to identify this fraud coming in real time. Yeah. So our latest service that we've just deployed is called Velocity. And no proactivity is needed here. You don't have to. It's not a reactive thing. It's completely a proactive thing. So with this, every ID that we scan for that customer within a given period of time, generally it's 24 or 36 hours. We're looking to see if we've seen that ID and that same face before within that previous 24, 36 hours, whatever it might be. Because again, this is an attack that we see all day long. These people are prolific. They go to one of these Gen AI sites and they'll create 150 different IDs and they'll attack just one after another, after another, after another, all with different names. It has been able to get through many of our customers. I know one of our customers, that particular scheme, they lost over $300,000 worth of devices in a weekend. And I'm sure they weren't immune. So pretty excited about that product and being able to stop it much faster. So I can't stop you the first time that you come in, but the second time that you come in with different information, we've got you.
Right. So is it like Velocity Check is it's learning from Fraud Shield? It's kind of picking up the lessons learned about the repeat fraudsters and kind of iterating on that and creating like as you said, a proactive defense? Is that sort of how
we certainly learned a lot from Fraud Shield, and that helped in the architecture. This uses a completely different type of technology,
right?
But accomplishes the same goal. But yeah, if it wasn't for Fraud Shield, we would know what we don't know, So we definitely learned a lot about what worked and what didn't work.
Interesting.
And you mentioned also behavioral biometrics being part of the platform earlier as well. That factored into either of these solutions, or is that like a third thing that is also operating on your platform to spot? Because it sounds like it's basically a whole bunch of systems that are like constantly running to look for fraud through the platform. But
it is a whole bunch of systems. Again, I've got to be a little bit cagey about some of the behavioral stuff, Alex. I'm not going to get into all those details, but we're looking at just the sensor data, camera use, things like that. You're looking at IP addresses. I mean, am I getting 100 different documents sent from the same device or the same IP address or a specific region? The guy says he's in Chicago and I'm getting all these requests coming in from Lagos. So those are part of the behavioral. That's abnormal, right? If I say I'm in Chicago, how can I be in Lagos? I'm probably up to something.
Yeah. I also wanted to know, and you probably have like actual figures somewhere, but maybe not at the ready, but the kinds of fraud that your system is detecting, how often is it like one just bad actor versus an organization? In other words, how big a factor is organized crime? I'm curious.
It has really shifted. In the past, and I started this thing 12 years ago, in the past, we didn't see nearly as much organized crime. Some of the tools that exist today didn't exist back then either. Today, we're seeing a lot of organized crime. We're seeing a lot of the same device being used that's sitting on a rack in Eastern Europe. We can tell that from the sensor data on the device, right? That thing hasn't been moved in 4 days, but they keep changing Wi-Fi's and IP addresses and the way the device looks, but it still has to come out of a pipe.
Is it the biggest factor now?
100%. 100% the biggest factor that we're seeing now. I mean, this has become stealing people's identities is super lucrative. It's become a very, very big business around the world. I mean, people have regular 9 to 5 jobs, go to work in office towers. They have vacations, sick leave, 401ks, but they're just to commit crime.
Yeah,
we're really seeing a huge proliferation on social media sites as well. I'm also on the board of the Identity Theft Resource Center, and then that's where we've seen the biggest spike. So people are trying to create all these bogus profiles, gain your confidence. So romance scams are big, and most all of that is organized crime as well.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's in a way even sadder to me.
It is.
Yeah. That sucks. Well, the other thing I was going to ask him, it just kind of occurred to me as you were talking, you have evidently become an expert in understanding the fraud signals that you can pick up from a device. So when you use your own phone, do you worry about what third parties might know about you? Like, does that enter your mind, or are you like, no, I've taken all the safety measures I need. I'm fine.
I'm the most careless person you could ever imagine, Alex. I So when we started this company, the thought of performing an identity verification by taking a picture of an ID and taking a picture of a face was foreign. I mean, everybody looked at me like I had 3 heads and they were just scratching their head. Like, how does that work? That doesn't make sense. We do this by asking your name, address, date of birth, and social and seeing if it matches. That's what makes sense. So part of that evangelism was getting out on stage and showing people live exactly how it worked, how well it worked, how well it would work in auditorium-like environments with weird lighting, how quick it was. But I never made any attempt to use a fake ID. I always used my own real ID and my own real face. And there have been rooms I've been in with, 7,000 people out there, and it's all being recorded. And I've been doing this now for a decade. So my name, my address, my date of birth, all that stuff is out there. It's never been obfuscated. It's pretty simple to stop, though. I simply just froze my credit with every credit bureau. You can't go and do anything with my data. You can't buy anything. And I don't ever need credit, so it's not really an inconvenience for me. So no, I don't worry about it. By the way, I'm an Apple user and I believe in their privacy commitment.
Yeah, well, we were just talking in our last episode about how with this Salt Typhoon attack, people who are on iMessage are okay. They're not going to be spied on, or so we think. But yeah, that does seem to be a real advantage of those products. But
I need to get up to speed on that one. You guys are teaching me something today. Thank you.
we're trying to spread the word. Yeah, Salt Typhoon is a serious thing that more people need to look into. But I think it got buried a little bit by all the election cycle news, which we all are ready to move beyond. And on that note, hopefully you can come back and talk with us again soon, because we got a lot of information out of Chris, And two for two, you've really helped us to learn a lot about these issues and how your platform works and the approach you're taking. And maybe you can share some trade secrets next time, depending on the patent situation.
Now we can talk about them and get people a little bit more intrigued. We won't give them the exact blueprint on how to beat us, but we can absolutely talk about some of the trade secrets and get into some more of the impact as well. I don't think people realize how this has proliferated. Last year, I know I've talked about telcos a lot, that was where the vertical that we first started in. But we're finding over 3,000 counterfeit fake IDs walking into the stores in North America every single day. I mean, it's over 1 million that have been tried to be passed, even after our technology's been deployed for years and stopping those things. You would think the fraudsters would talk a little bit more, but they're persistent. They're going to keep trying.
And on that note, everyone stay vigilant.
Yes.
And Blair, keep doing the great work you're doing with your team to stop these guys, and we'll catch up and see how that's all going again soon.
Can't wait.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks again to Blair for having a great conversation with us on ID Talk, and to the Authentic ID team. And we also want to thank our other founding partners as well: Anonybit, FaceTech, HID, Neurotechnology, and Tech5. Really appreciate your support. Thank you.